The sound of shattering glass echoed through the dusty streets of Fairplay, Colorado, announcing another brawl at the saloon. But Lydia Shepherd barely registered it as she knelt in the small wooden chapel at the edge of town. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. It was the spring of 1874, and she had been praying for 3 hours straight, her voice long since reduced to whispers as she begged for deliverance from the situation that threatened to destroy everything she held dear. The afternoon sun filtered through the simple glass windows, casting golden rectangles across the rough wooden floor where her skirts pooled around her. Her father was dying. The mine he had invested everything in had collapsed 2 months ago, burying not just his life savings but his spirit along with it. The injury he had sustained trying to help with the rescue efforts had become infected, and now the fever consumed him day and night. She was 21 years old, alone except for her ailing father, and the bank was threatening to seize their small homestead on the outskirts of town. Lydia had nowhere to turn. Her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn brother when Lydia was 15. She had no siblings, no extended family within 1,000 miles. The few friends she had made in Fairplay had their own struggles. Mining towns were harsh places, especially for women, and especially when fortune turned its back on you. She pressed her forehead against her clasped hands and let the tears finally come, hot and desperate against her cold fingers. She did not hear the chapel door open. She did not hear the heavy footsteps, cautious and deliberate, moving down the aisle. She did not know anyone else was there until she felt a presence beside her, large and solid, and then heard the creak of old knees as someone knelt on the hard floor next to her pew. Lydia's eyes flew open and she gasped, jerking back slightly. The man beside her was unlike anyone she had ever seen in Fairplay. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall even on his knees, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the light from the window behind him. His arms were thick with muscle beneath the worn buckskin shirt he wore, and his hands, now clasped in prayer like her own, were calloused and scarred. He had dark brown hair that fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a strip of leather, and a beard that was neatly trimmed despite his rugged appearance. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were a startling gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they were closed in what appeared to be genuine prayer. She should have been frightened. Women alone were always warned about strange men, especially mountain men who lived outside the bounds of civilized society. But something about his presence felt different. He was not crowding her. He had simply knelt beside her, close enough to show solidarity but far enough to be respectful, and he was praying. For several minutes they knelt in silence together. Lydia found herself unable to resume her own prayers, too aware of this stranger, too confused by his appearance and his purpose. Finally, he opened his eyes and turned his head slightly toward her. "I apologize for intruding on your prayers, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in the quiet chapel. "I came in to speak with the Lord myself, and I saw you there, looking so desperate, so lost. I felt compelled to kneel beside you, to add my prayers to yours, whatever burden you might be carrying." His words were surprisingly articulate for someone dressed as he was. Mountain men were often rough, uneducated, more comfortable with traps and trails than words and people. This man spoke with care and something that sounded almost like gentleness. "Who are you?" Lydia whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of prayer. "My name is Warren Zimmerman," he said, and he shifted to sit back on the pew, giving his knees a rest. The movement showed the full extent of his powerful build. His thighs were thick with muscle, his waist narrow, his chest broad. He looked like he could wrestle a bear and win. "I have been living in the mountains west of here for the past 8 years, trapping and hunting. I came into town for supplies and heard about the mine collapse. I lost my brother in a mine accident back in '59 in California. I know something of that particular sorrow." Lydia slowly moved to sit on the pew as well, her legs grateful for the relief. She studied his face more carefully now. He was perhaps 30 years old, maybe a year or two more, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into bright snow and harsh sun. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, mostly hidden by hair, and another along his jawline disappearing into his beard. His nose looked like it had been broken at least once. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his features, a rugged strength that matched his body. "My father was injured in the collapse," she found herself saying, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "He is dying. The infection has spread and the doctor says there is nothing more to be done. We have no money. The mine was supposed to be our future, and now it is our grave. I have been praying for a miracle, for anything, because I do not know what else to do." Warren listened without interrupting, his gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow was not. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "What is your name?" he asked. Lydia Shepherd." "Miss Shepherd, I will not insult you by saying empty words about how things will work out or how the Lord works in mysterious ways. I learned long ago that life is hard and unfair, especially out here. But I will say this: I have means. Not great wealth, but I have saved what I have earned over the years. I have no family, no obligations. If you would accept help from a stranger, I would be honored to pay for a proper doctor. Someone better than the frontier physicians. Maybe someone from Denver who has real training. I would be honored to help settle your father's debts." Lydia stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "I know what it is to be alone and desperate," Warren said simply. "I know what it is to pray for help that does not come. After my brother died, I was in a dark place. A stranger helped me then, asked for nothing in return, just said that I should help someone else when I had the chance. I have been waiting for that chance, Miss Shepherd. Maybe this is it." "I could never repay you," Lydia said, her heart pounding. Was this real? Was this man, this stranger, truly offering to save her father, to save her? "I am not asking for repayment," Warren said. He stood, and the movement was surprisingly graceful for someone so large. "I am staying at the boarding house on Main Street. Think about my offer. Pray on it if you need to. But if you want my help, come find me before sunset tomorrow. After that, I will be heading back to the mountains and I may not be back in Fairplay for months." He turned to leave, but Lydia scrambled to her feet, her hand reaching out almost of its own accord. "Wait." He paused, looking back at her. "Why were you praying?" she asked. "You said you came to speak with the Lord. What were you praying for?" Something flickered across his face, something vulnerable and almost painful. "For purpose," he said quietly. "For a reason to come down from the mountain, to be among people again. I have been alone for so long, Miss Shepherd. It is peaceful, but it is also empty. I have been asking God to show me what I am supposed to do with my life, why I survived when my brother did not. Maybe helping you is the answer. Maybe that is why I walked into this chapel at exactly the moment you were here." With that, he left, his footsteps echoing through the small space until the door closed behind him and Lydia was alone once more. She stood there for a long time, her mind reeling. Then she dropped back to her knees and resumed her prayers, but they were different now. She was no longer begging for a miracle. She was asking for wisdom, for discernment, for the courage to accept help from a stranger if that help was truly what it appeared to be. When she finally left the chapel, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Fairplay was a small town, established just over a decade ago when gold and silver brought prospectors flooding into Colorado. The main street was lined with false-fronted buildings. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a bank, a blacksmith, and a few other businesses. There were perhaps 200 permanent residents, with more coming and going as mining prospects waxed and waned. It was a rough place, but it had been home for the past 5 years, ever since her father had decided to try his luck in the Colorado mountains. Lydia walked quickly through the streets, ignoring the calls from the men lounging outside the saloon. Her dress was simple, a brown calico that had seen better days, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple bun. She was not beautiful in the dramatic sense, but she had clear blue eyes and a pleasant face, and in a town with few women, any female drew attention. She kept her eyes down and her pace quick until she reached the small cabin she shared with her father on the southern edge of town. Inside, her father lay on the narrow bed near the fireplace. Thomas Shepherd had once been a strong man, robust and full of energy. Now he was a shadow, his face gaunt and gray, his body wasted by fever and infection. His left leg was wrapped in bandages that needed changing, and the smell of sickness hung heavy in the small space. "Father," Lydia said softly, moving to his side, "I am home." His eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. "Lydia, is that you?" "Yes, Father, I am here." She placed a cool cloth on his forehead, wrung out from the bucket of water she kept by the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," he whispered. "So tired. Did the bank come today?" "No, Father, not today." That was a lie. The bank had sent a representative that morning, reminding her that they had 1 week to settle the debt or lose the property. But her father did not need to know that. He had enough burdens. She prepared a thin soup from the last of their supplies and managed to get him to take a few spoonfuls before he drifted off again. Then she sat by the fire, staring at the flames, thinking about Warren Zimmerman and his impossible offer. Could she trust him? Men did not offer help without expecting something in return, not in her experience. But there had been something in his eyes, something genuine. He had been praying. He had knelt beside her not to take advantage but to offer solidarity. And his story about his brother, about the stranger who had helped him, had the ring of truth. But even if he was genuine, could she accept such help? It went against everything she had been taught about independence and self-reliance. And yet, what choice did she have? Pride would not save her father. Pride would not keep a roof over her head. She barely slept that night, tossing on her own narrow bed in the corner of the cabin, listening to her father's labored breathing. When dawn came, she rose with a sense of determination. She would go find Warren Zimmerman. She would accept his help, and somehow, someday, she would find a way to repay him, whether he wanted repayment or not. The boarding house was easy to find. Fairplay only had 2 places for travelers to stay, and the boarding house was the cheaper, simpler option. It was run by a widow named Mrs. Patricia Henley, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue who did not tolerate nonsense. "I am looking for Warren Zimmerman," Lydia said when Mrs. Henley answered her knock. The older woman raised an eyebrow. "The mountain man. What business do you have with him, girl?" "That is between him and me," Lydia said, lifting her chin. Mrs. Henley studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "He is in the back room, the one facing the mountains. But if you are going back there alone, I am coming with you. I will not have any impropriety under my roof." Lydia wanted to protest, but realized it was futile. Mrs. Henley led her through the boarding house to a door at the rear and knocked sharply. "Zimmerman, you have a visitor," The door opened, and Warren stood there, looking even larger in the confined space of the hallway. He had clearly just woken up, his hair loose around his shoulders, his shirt unlaced at the neck showing a glimpse of his muscled chest. When he saw Lydia, something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to something that might have been relief. "Miss Shepherd," he said, "I did not expect to see you so early." "I have thought about your offer," Lydia said, acutely aware of Mrs. Henley's presence behind her. "If it is still open, I would like to accept it." Warren nodded slowly. "It is still open. Come in, Mrs. Henley. Would you be willing to sit as chaperone while Miss Shepherd and I discuss the particulars?" The older woman looked surprised at being asked, rather than assumed, but nodded. "I suppose I can spare a few minutes." Warren's room was sparse but clean. There was a bed, a small table with a single chair, and a window that did indeed face west toward the mountains. His belongings were few: a large leather pack, a rifle propped in the corner, various furs and hides rolled and tied. He gestured for Lydia to take the chair while he sat on the edge of the bed. Mrs. Henley positioned herself by the door, arms crossed but expression curious. "Tell me exactly what you need," Warren said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Lydia took a breath and laid it all out. The debt to the bank, $400 that might as well be $4 million. The medical care her father needed, which the local doctor had given up on. The basic supplies they lacked because every penny had gone to trying to keep the homestead. Warren listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he stood and went to his pack, pulling out a small leather pouch. He counted out bills and gold coins, more money than Lydia had seen in years, and placed it on the table in front of her. "This should cover the bank and then some," he said. "As for the doctor, I will ride to Denver myself. There is a physician there I have heard of, a man who studied back east and has had success with infections others had given up on. I cannot promise he will come, but I will do my best to convince him." Lydia stared at the money, her hands trembling. "I do not understand. Why are you doing this?" Warren was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I told you my brother died in a mining accident. What I did not tell you was that it was my fault. We were partners, working a claim together in California. I insisted we go deeper, even though he said the supports were not strong enough. I was greedy, thought we were close to a big strike. The tunnel collapsed. I managed to dig my way out, but I could not reach him in time. He died calling for me, and I could not save him." His voice was steady, but Lydia could hear the pain beneath the words, old and deep, and never fully healed. "I have spent the past 15 years trying to make sense of it, trying to find some purpose in my survival when he, who was better than me in every way, died. I have lived alone in the mountains because I felt I did not deserve human company, did not deserve comfort or connection. But I am tired, Miss Shepherd. I am tired of running from ghosts. When I saw you in that chapel, praying with such desperation, I felt something I have not felt in years. I felt needed. I felt like maybe, just maybe, God was giving me a chance to save someone since I could not save my brother. Please, let me do this. Not for you, but for me. Let me help you so that I can finally forgive myself." The raw honesty in his words shook Lydia to her core. She had expected many things, but not this. Not vulnerability, not confession, not a man laying bare his deepest wound to explain his kindness. "I accept your help," she said quietly, "but on one condition. When my father is better, when things are stable, you will come to dinner at our home. You will let me cook for you and thank you properly. You will not disappear into the mountains without letting me express my gratitude." "Agreed." A small smile tugged at Warren's lips, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him look younger. "Agreed, Mrs. Henley cleared her throat. "Well, I will say this, Zimmerman. You are either the biggest fool I have ever met or the best man. Time will tell which." Warren stood and extended his hand to Lydia. She took it, his palm warm and calloused against hers, and felt something pass between them, some unspoken understanding or connection that made her breath catch. "I will leave for Denver within the hour," he said. "In the meantime, take that money and settle your affairs. Buy whatever you need for your father's care. I should be back within a week, hopefully with a doctor in tow." The next several days passed in a blur. Lydia paid off the bank, the look of shock on the manager's face almost worth the years of stress. She bought food and medicine, new bandages and clean linens. She hired a woman from town to help with her father's care while she caught up on the chores that had fallen by the wayside. And she waited for Warren to return, her heart jumping every time she heard horses on the street outside. He returned 6 days later, just as the sun was setting. Lydia was sitting on the porch of the cabin, exhausted from a day of cleaning and washing, when she saw him riding down the street on a large roan horse. Behind him, on a smaller mare, was a well-dressed man with a black medical bag and an expression of deep skepticism. Lydia rushed to meet them, her heart in her throat. Warren dismounted with easy grace and turned to help the other man down. "Miss Shepherd, this is Dr. Henry Morrison from Denver. Doctor, this is the young woman I told you about." Dr. Morrison was in his 50s with gray hair and spectacles, and he looked utterly out of place in the dusty mining town. He studied Lydia with a critical eye, then nodded curtly. "Show me to the patient." The next hour was tense. Dr. Morrison examined her father thoroughly, changing the bandages, studying the wound, asking questions that Lydia did her best to answer. Warren waited outside, giving them space but staying close enough that Lydia could see his shadow against the wall through the window. Finally, the doctor emerged, his expression grim but not hopeless. "The infection is severe, but not beyond treatment. I will need to perform a procedure to drain the wound and remove necrotic tissue. It will be painful, and there is no guarantee of success, but your father is strong enough that I believe he has a chance. I will need several days here to monitor him and ensure the infection does not return." "Whatever you need," Lydia said. Thank you so much." Dr. Morrison glanced at Warren, who had stepped onto the porch. "Your friend here paid me handsomely for this trip and promised even more if I succeed. I hope for all our sakes that I do." The procedure happened the next morning. Lydia held her father's hand while Dr. Morrison worked, and Warren, at her quiet request, held her other hand, his grip strong and steady. Her father screamed despite the whiskey they had given him for the pain, and Lydia wept, but Warren never flinched, never let go, his presence an anchor in the storm. When it was done, Dr. Morrison was cautiously optimistic. "Now we wait. Keep him clean, keep him fed if he will eat, and pray." They waited. Dr. Morrison stayed 3 days, monitoring the wound, changing bandages, administering medicines he had brought from Denver. On the 3rd day, her father's fever broke. He woke lucid for the first time in weeks and asked for food. Dr. Morrison smiled, the first genuine emotion Lydia had seen from him. "He is going to live," the doctor said. "The infection is clearing. He will need weeks of rest and care, but he is going to live." Lydia collapsed into a chair and sobbed with relief. Warren, who had been staying at the boarding house but checking in daily, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, and they stayed like that for a long moment, sharing the victory in silence. Dr. Morrison left the next day, his fee paid and his professional pride satisfied. Before he departed, he pulled Lydia aside. "That man, Zimmerman, he is in love with you. I have been a doctor for 30 years and I know the look. Just thought you should know." Lydia was speechless as the doctor rode away. Was it true? Warren had been nothing but respectful, kind, and helpful, but there had been moments, small ones, where she had caught him looking at her with something more than friendly concern. And if she was honest with herself, she had been looking at him the same way. Warren stayed in Fairplay. He said it was to ensure her father's recovery, and that was partly true. But as the days turned into weeks and her father grew stronger, it became clear there was another reason. He was courting her in his own quiet, steady way. He brought gifts, not bought from stores but made with his own hands. A set of beautifully carved wooden utensils for the kitchen. A thick fur blanket for cold nights. A chair he had built himself, sturdy and perfect for her father to sit in as he recovered. He came for dinner, as promised, and praised her cooking with genuine enthusiasm. He helped repair the cabin, fixing the roof where it leaked and reinforcing the walls against the coming winter. And he talked to her, really talked. He told her about his life in the mountains, about the beauty and the loneliness, the freedom and the fear. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his brother and their dreams of striking it rich. He told her about the years after the accident, the guilt and the self-imposed exile. And slowly, hesitantly, Lydia began to tell him her own stories. About her mother's death, about her father's grief and determination to make a new start out west, about her own dreams that had been put on hold to care for him. 2 months after that day in the chapel, on a cool evening in July, Warren asked her to walk with him. They strolled to the edge of town, to a small hill that overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the mountains in the distance were purple and gold. "Lydia," Warren said, taking her hand. "I came to Fairplay looking for supplies, but I found something far more valuable. I found purpose. I found connection. I found you. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and I do not want them to end. I know I am just a mountain man, rough and unpolished. I know I do not have much to offer besides some saved money and a willingness to work. But if you would have me, I would like to court you properly, with the intention of marriage. I would like to build a life with you, here in Fairplay or wherever you would like to go. What do you say?" Lydia looked at him, this big, strong, gentle man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer. She thought about the moment in the chapel, when he had knelt beside her and joined his prayers to hers. She thought about everything he had done, everything he had sacrificed, not out of obligation but out of genuine care. And she realized that somewhere along the way she had fallen in love with him. "I say yes," she whispered, and then, more firmly, "Yes, Warren. I would very much like for you to court me." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt the solidity of his chest, the warmth of his embrace, the rapid beating of his heart that matched her own. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But when she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, he deepened the kiss, his arms tightening around her, and she felt safe and cherished and wanted in a way she had never experienced before. The courtship was a whirlwind, but a proper one. Warren was determined to do everything correctly, to show respect to her and her father, to prove himself worthy. He took a job at the general store, using his knowledge of furs and hides to help the owner expand his business. He attended church every Sunday, sitting beside Lydia and her father. He became a fixture in Fairplay, no longer the strange mountain man but Warren Zimmerman, reliable and hardworking, the man who had saved the Shepherd family. Her father recovered fully, though he walked with a limp and tired easily. But his spirit returned, and with it his sharp mind. He took a job as a clerk at the mining office, using his experience to help assess claims and mediate disputes. He watched Warren's courtship of his daughter with approval, often telling Lydia that she could not have found a better man if she had searched the entire territory. 6 months after their first meeting, on a crisp December day in 1874, Warren and Lydia were married in the same chapel where they had met. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious and celebratory. Lydia wore a dress of deep blue that she had sewn herself, and Warren wore new clothes bought from the general store, though he still looked more comfortable in buckskin. Her father walked her down the aisle, tears streaming down his face, and placed her hand in Warren's with a whispered blessing. The vows were traditional, but when Warren spoke them, his voice was thick with emotion. "I, Warren Zimmerman, take you, Lydia Shepherd, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Lydia repeated the same vows, her voice steady and clear, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed her with such joy and passion that several people in the small congregation laughed and applauded. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house, Mrs. Henley having given them her best room with a wink and admonishment to not be too loud. Lydia was nervous, having little knowledge of what to expect, but Warren was patient and gentle, guiding her through the intimacy with care and reverence. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable and aroused before he finally joined with her. The pain was brief, and then there was only pleasure and connection, the sense of two becoming one in the most profound way possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Lydia's head on Warren's chest, his arms wrapped around her protectively. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Lydia whispered back, and she felt the truth of it in every fiber of her being. They moved into the cabin with her father, the three of them making it work despite the cramped quarters. Warren continued working at the general store, and Lydia took in sewing and mending to bring in extra income. They saved every penny, planning for the future, dreaming of building a larger house and maybe starting a family. Life was not easy. Fairplay was still a rough mining town, and there were challenges and hardships. But they faced them together, Warren and Lydia, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing day. Warren's guilt over his brother's death began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace and purpose. Lydia's fear and desperation were long gone, replaced by confidence and joy. Her father thrived, happy to see his daughter so well cared for and loved. In the spring of 1875, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. She told Warren on a Sunday afternoon as they walked through the meadow behind their cabin, wildflowers blooming in riotous color all around them. He stopped dead in his tracks, his gray eyes wide with shock and then blazing with joy. "Truly?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Truly," Lydia confirmed, laughing at his expression. He let out a whoop that probably carried all the way to town, then swept her up in his arms and spun her around, careful even in his excitement. "We are going to have a baby. You are going to make me a father." "Oh, Lydia, I never thought I would have this. Never dreamed I deserved this kind of happiness." "You deserve it," Lydia said firmly, cupping his face in her hands. "You deserve all of it and more. You are a good man, Warren Zimmerman, and you are going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Lydia suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and she grew enormous, her small frame struggling with the weight of the child. But Warren was attentive and patient, rubbing her feet when they swelled, making sure she ate even when she did not feel like it, holding her when the fears and doubts crept in during the long nights. In late November of 1875, on a snowy evening that blanketed Fairplay in white, Lydia went into labor. Warren rode through the storm to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Agnes Turner, who had delivered half the babies in town. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Warren feared he would lose both his wife and child. He paced outside the cabin, praying more fervently than he had since that day in the chapel, begging God to spare them. Finally, as dawn broke and the snow stopped falling, he heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn. Agnes emerged from the cabin, tired but smiling. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife is fine. Exhausted but fine." Warren rushed inside to find Lydia propped up in bed, looking pale and worn but radiant, cradling a bundle in her arms. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face of his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was already showing signs of his father's strong features. "He is perfect," Warren breathed, reaching out to touch the impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb, and Warren felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "What should we name him?" Lydia asked softly. Warren was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Joseph, after my brother, if that is all right with you." Lydia smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Joseph Zimmerman, it is perfect." They thrived as a family. Joseph was a happy baby, growing strong and healthy. Her father doted on his grandson, spending hours carving toys and telling stories. Warren took on extra work, determined to provide for his expanding family. He also began teaching Lydia to shoot and track, skills he had learned in his mountain years, wanting her to be able to protect herself and Joseph if anything ever happened to him. In 1877, they finally saved enough to buy a piece of land just outside Fairplay, a beautiful plot with a creek running through it and a view of the mountains. Warren built a house with his own hands, a sturdy 2-story structure with enough room for everyone. Lydia planted a garden, and her father built a workshop where he could do carpentry, a hobby he had taken up during his recovery. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Warren took occasional trips into the mountains to hunt and trap, but he always came back within a few days, unable to stay away from his family for long. Lydia became known in Fairplay as a skilled seamstress, and she took on orders from throughout the region. Joseph grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around and listening to his stories. In 1879, Lydia became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1880, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Caroline after Warren's mother. She had Lydia's blue eyes and blonde hair, a tiny, perfect mirror of her mother. Joseph, now 4 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. Fairplay continued to grow, becoming more established and less wild. The mines played out eventually, as they always did, but by then the town had diversified enough to survive. Warren became a respected figure in the community, serving on the town council and helping to establish a proper school. Lydia taught sewing classes to young women and became known for her charitable work, never forgetting what it felt like to be desperate and alone. Her father lived to see his grandchildren grow, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1883 at the age of 68. He died in the house Warren had built, surrounded by family, content, and at peace. They buried him in the Fairplay cemetery, and Warren carved a beautiful headstone himself, inscribed with words that Lydia chose. Thomas Shepherd, beloved father and grandfather who found gold in family. Warren and Lydia continued to grow their family. In 1882, they had another son whom they named Daniel. In 1885, another daughter, Rebecca. The house that had seemed so spacious now rang with the sounds of children, and Warren and Lydia would not have had it any other way. Through it all, their love remained the foundation. They still walked together in the evenings when the children were asleep, talking about everything and nothing. Warren still looked at Lydia with the same wonder he had felt that first day in the chapel. Still, could not quite believe she was his. Lydia still felt her heart skip when Warren came home each evening, still marveled at how lucky she had been that he had walked into her life when she needed him most. On their 10th wedding anniversary, in December of 1884, Warren took Lydia back to the chapel where they had met. It was late evening and the building was empty and quiet. They knelt together in the same spot where they had knelt a decade before, and Warren took her hands in his. "I prayed for purpose that day," he said softly. "I prayed to understand why I had been spared, what I was meant to do with my life. You were the answer, Lydia. You and our children, this life we have built together. You saved me as much as I saved you. I want you to know that." Lydia squeezed his hands, tears streaming down her face. "I prayed for a miracle," she said, "for deliverance, for help, for hope. And then you knelt beside me, this stranger who became everything. You were my miracle, Warren. You still are, every single day." They kissed there in the chapel, as they had on their wedding day, and renewed their vows to each other, not in front of a congregation but just between themselves and God. It was a moment of pure connection, pure love, pure gratitude for the journey they had been on and the journey still ahead. As the years continued to pass, Warren began to slow down. The hard years in the mountains had taken their toll, and his knees ached in the cold, his back sometimes protesting the heavy work. But he never complained. He taught his sons to hunt and build and be honorable men. He taught his daughters to be strong and capable, to never depend entirely on anyone else, but to know when to accept help. He loved Lydia with a constancy that never wavered, through sickness and health, through lean times and prosperous ones, through the mundane dailiness of life and the extraordinary moments. In 1893, when Warren was 49 and Lydia was 40, they became grandparents for the first time. Joseph, now 17 and working as an apprentice carpenter, married a sweet girl named Emma, and they had a baby boy the following year. Warren held his grandson with the same reverence he had held his own children, and Lydia watched with joy as the cycle continued. The new century approached, bringing with it changes and challenges. The Wild West was becoming less wild, more civilized. Railroads connected the most remote towns to the broader world. Automobiles were starting to appear in the cities, though they were still rare novelties in places like Fairplay. Warren and Lydia watched the world transform around them, but their corner of it remained steady, rooted in the values and love they had built their life on. In 1904, on a winter evening much like the one when Joseph had been born, Warren sat in his favorite chair by the fire, Lydia on the arm of the chair beside him, their hands intertwined. The house was full of family. Joseph and his wife and 3 children. Caroline, now 24 and recently engaged. Daniel, working as a schoolteacher in Denver but home for the holidays. Rebecca, still living at home and helping Lydia with her sewing business. The noise and chaos were beautiful, the life they had created spreading out in branches they could never have imagined. "Tell us the story again," one of the grandchildren asked, tugging on Warren's sleeve. "Tell us how you and Grandma met." Warren smiled, the same smile that had first appeared when Lydia accepted his help all those years ago. He looked at his wife and she looked back, and in that moment they were back in the chapel, 2 desperate souls finding each other at exactly the right time. "It was a long time ago," Warren began, his voice still deep and resonant despite his years. "In 1874, I was a mountain man, living alone up in the high country, and your grandmother was a young woman with a sick father and a heavy heart. I walked into a chapel one afternoon, and there she was, praying. I did not know her. I did not know her story. But I felt called to kneel beside her, to add my prayers to hers. And in that moment, in that simple act, both our prayers were answered." He paused, squeezing Lydia's hand. "She became my purpose. I became her miracle. We became each other's answered prayer. And everything that came after, all of you, this family, this life, it all started in that chapel, with two people brave enough to accept the help the Lord sent them." The children listened, rapt, even though they had heard the story dozens of times. It never got old, the tale of how their grandparents had found each other, how love had saved them both. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Warren and Lydia stood on the porch of their house, looking up at the stars. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark and eternal, witnesses to their story. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked suddenly. "Marrying me, tying your life to mine?" Lydia turned to him, shocked. "Never, not for a single moment. Why would you even ask that?" Warren shrugged, suddenly looking vulnerable in a way he rarely did. "I was just a mountain man, Lydia. Rough and uneducated. You could have had someone better, someone who could have given you an easier life." Lydia reached up and cupped his face, making him look at her. "You gave me the best life," she said fiercely. "You saved my father, you saved me. You gave me love and children and a home. You showed me what it means to be cherished, to be a partner, to build something beautiful together. There is no one better, Warren. There is only you, and that has always been more than enough." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and she responded with all the love that still burned in her heart after 30 years of marriage. They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, as they had every night since their wedding, and fell asleep secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other everything they had ever needed. Warren passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1909, at the age of 65. It was not unexpected. His health had been declining for a year, his body finally giving in to the years of hard living. But he died at home, in the house he had built, surrounded by his family, with Lydia holding his hand. She grieved deeply, but not bitterly. She had had 35 years with him, 35 years of love and partnership and joy. She had his children and grandchildren, the legacy of their love made flesh. She continued to live in their house, tending her garden, doing her sewing, spending time with family. And every Sunday, she went to the chapel in Fairplay and knelt in the same spot where she had first met Warren. She prayed for him, thanked God for him, and remembered the miracle of that day when a stranger had knelt beside her and changed her life forever. Lydia Zimmerman lived until 1926, dying at the age of 73. She was surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a woman who had lived a full and beautiful life. They buried her beside Warren in the Fairplay cemetery, under a headstone that Warren's grandson, also named Warren, had carved. It read, "Lydia Zimmerman, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She prayed for a miracle and received love." The story of Warren and Lydia became legend in Fairplay, passed down through generations. The chapel where they met became a popular place for couples to marry, drawn by the romantic tale of the mountain man and the praying woman. Their descendants continued to thrive, spreading throughout Colorado and beyond, carrying with them the values their grandparents had instilled: faith, hard work, compassion, and above all, the belief that sometimes the answer to your prayers comes in the most unexpected forms. Years later, one of their great-great-grandchildren, a young woman studying history at the University of Colorado, decided to research her family's story for a class project. She dug through records, interviewed the oldest living relatives, and pieced together the full narrative. She learned about Thomas Shepard's injury and the mine collapse. She found the bank records showing the debt paid off, the doctor's notes on her great-great-great-grandfather's treatment. She discovered Warren's service on the town council, Lydia's charitable work, the births and deaths and marriages that had woven their family tapestry. But what struck her most was a letter she found in an old trunk, written by Warren to Lydia on their silver wedding anniversary in 1899. It was yellowed and fragile, but the words were still clear. "My dearest Lydia, 25 years ago today, I stood in that chapel and promised to love you until death. It was the easiest promise I ever made and the most important. You have been my North Star, my anchor, my reason for everything. Before you I was lost, wandering in the wilderness both literal and spiritual. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to be better than I ever thought I could be. I still remember the first moment I saw you, kneeling in that chapel, praying so desperately. I remember how small you looked, how broken, and I remember the compulsion I felt to kneel beside you. I thought I was there to help you, but the truth is you saved me. Your faith, your strength, your willingness to trust a stranger, it all showed me what I had been missing. You showed me that redemption is possible, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that sometimes the answer to prayer is simply another person willing to say yes. We have built a beautiful life together. Our children are strong and good. Our home is full of love and laughter, and I wake every morning grateful for one more day with you. If I could go back and tell that lonely mountain man in the chapel what his future held, he would not believe me. He would not believe that such happiness was possible, that such love existed. Thank you, my darling wife, for saying yes to me all those years ago. Thank you for every day since. Thank you for being my answered prayer. Forever yours." Warren, the young woman, carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the trunk. She sat there for a long time, thinking about her ancestors, about the courage it took to accept help, to offer it, to build a life together in a harsh and unforgiving place. She thought about how one moment, one decision, one prayer could change everything. And she thought about the chapel in Fairplay, still standing after all these years, a testament to faith and love, and the miracles that happen when two souls find each other at exactly the right moment. She decided that when she got married someday, if she was lucky enough to find a love like Warren and Lydia had, she would do it there in that chapel, continuing a tradition that had started over 150 years ago with a mountain man and a praying woman who had become each other's answered prayer. The story of Warren Zimmerman and Lydia Shepherd was one of faith, courage, and love. It was a story of two broken people who found healing in each other, who built something beautiful out of desperation and compassion. It was a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments precede the greatest blessings, that help can come from the most unexpected sources, and that love, real love, has the power to redeem and transform. In the mountains of Colorado, in a small town called Fairplay, their legacy lived on, not just in the descendants who bore their names and blood, but in the story itself, a story of Wild West faith and enduring love that would be told for generations to come. A story that began with a simple act of kneeling beside someone in prayer, and ended with a love that spanned lifetimes, touching everyone who heard it with the reminder that miracles still happen, and that sometimes, just sometimes, when you pray for help, God sends you exactly what you need, even if it comes in the form of a rough mountain man with a gentle heart and a willingness to kneel beside you in your darkest hour.